My first trip to China was in 1975. My father was the bicycling ambassador representing the United States as the chief liaison officer. And it was such an interesting time in China's history. We were warmly received, but China was very poor back in 1975. I had an opportunity to come back in the early 80s after the door opened, and was fascinated to see how the changes that Deng Xiaoping led into the country, how the changes were affecting society. And so I would come back from time to time in the 80s and the 90s and saw this tremendous progress, and then it's been accelerated over the past 23 years. And I've seen China's rise, and it's been a pretty remarkable thing in history for me to be able to witness to China's peaceful rise. Graham Allison at Harvard studied 16 cases over the past 500 or 600 years where a rising power is challenging or perceived to be challenging an established power. And in 12 of the 16 cases, it turned out that there was a hard war, a hot war. And so Graham Allison's point in writing the book is that we need to learn from history. We need to avoid jumping into the Thucydides Trap, which describes some inevitability to war as a rising power challenges an established power. And a lot of the behaviors we see from history, from the established power, so talking about the United States now, are reflected in historical cases where we ended up in war because there were misjudgments about the intentions of the rising power, or misunderstandings of basic factual scenarios related to the rising power. And so we see a lot of mistruth in the United States right now about China, misunderstandings about China. It scares me that we are kind of inching towards a conflict. It sounds crazy in this world that two, deeply connected countries where we have many shared interests, that we might end up moving closer to conflict is really sad to me. In my dad's world, he always believed that being present with other people, whether it's government to government or people to people or business to business, being with people helps to build better understanding, helps to build mutual respect, and ultimately can lead to collaboration. I would urge both governments to be very open to exchanging delegations. Our ministries of energy, our ministries of defense, our ministries of commerce should be sharing and meeting and learning from one another to lower tensions and to develop a more respectful relationship. First of all, I think it's a little unfair to heap a lot of blame on China for pollution. America went through an industrial revolution back at the turn of the 20th century, back in the early 1900s, and we caused enormous damage to our environment at the time, polluting the waters, polluting the air. Our industrial complex had no environmental standards at the time, and luckily the earth is pretty resilient, and now we have beautiful water in Boston Harbor, and the air is much cleaner and fresher because we have righted that wrong. And so China, as it's going through the Industrial Revolution, is doing so in a world where there's an intense pressure for reducing carbon emissions. And so it's a little unfair to be, saying that China is such an abuser when in fact right now, China is in many ways leading the way towards carbon capture, carbon reduction, renewable energy deployment, and all those kinds of things. China has an amazing system in one sense, in many senses, but in one that I'm impressed with. The central government here has set the goal of carbon peak 2030, carbon neutral 2060. And for a country of China's size and manufacturing scale and car use, et cetera, that's a highly ambitious goal. Once the goal is set from the top, I visited many party leaders, mayors, governors of districts, and deputy vice mayors, and blah. I met many, many leaders in the past 2.5 weeks. All of them have talked about what they're doing in terms of meeting the KPI for air quality, for emissions, and for what they're doing with the green energy deployment in their communities. There's a consensus that's developed from the top that's pushed down into the system and it's leading to remarkable changes. When China sets goals, whether it's GDP growth or greener, cleaner, better air, the Chinese tend to meet those goals. It's an impressive system in that way.